Hello, in this video I'm going to cover this 3D printed model that I painted of, well, it's two sandworms, I suppose. Um, the models are by Kijai, and I've linked to the STL where you can download them. The download includes 3 different pieces. There's a short sandworm, a tall sandworm, and a sandworm segment. So I'll talk about all 3 of these. I've also linked to my blog where I discuss all of my 3D printed paint jobs, and I've linked to another video I've done where I discuss just the materials that I use for finishing my models, if that's something you'd like to check out and possibly start finishing your own models. So yeah, about these sandworms. As you can see, they are modeled after the sandworms from Dune, which, I mean, I was raised on science fiction, so this is a really cool a cool model to own for me. It was a really cool model to paint, um, knowing where it came from. It's quite true to the film, I feel, in its construction. And yeah, so all 3 of these sandworms print completely supportless. Um, and they were pretty easy to paint, I suppose, from a perspective of there aren't many parts to them. However, the inside of the mouth was quite tricky. So, as I do with all my paints, I primed them first, and that was with a layer of brushed on acrylic paint, slightly thinned out because I didn't want to fill in any of these beautiful ridges or fill in any of the teeth um, with paint. So I let that dry for a day, and then I set to work blocking in the colors. For the sand, instead of making it too sandy colored, because clearly the worm is really sand colored, I didn't want it to blend in. I wanted the worm to definitely pop from the base, so I made the base more of a brown color. I made the worm kind of a flesh color. And for the inside of the mouth, I blocked in, it was actually a copper color that I mixed with a bit of white and a bit of red, to change it slightly, make it, well, obviously a bit red, but I wanted to maintain that touch of metallic so that it looks a bit wet, I guess. Not that that's necessarily entirely true to Dune, but I thought, for the model's um, sake, I wanted all the bumps and the bits inside the mouth to really catch the light. So that's why I went metallic. So right after the colors were blocked in, I set to work on my shading. That was done with a black wash. Actually, no, it wasn't black, it was dark brown. I did a dark brown wash, and I really got it into the grooves, and I had to do that in a couple of layers because, when it's standing up vertically, the paint just wants to run down, so that was a bit tricky. Um, I got a good amount of shadow into the area between the worm and where it's bursting out of the model. And I shaded the base with a very dark brown, for probably the bottom half of it. I shaded that quite dark because I wanted to make kind of a gradual color change to the top. The inside of the mouth is shaded, and I think that was just a tiny bit of a brown wash just to bring out those ridges a little bit, but not so much that I covered up the metallic bit that I'd put in there. After all of the shading was done, I did the highlights. Now the highlights on the body are just a lightened version of this flesh color that was applied in several layers. The the highlights on the base here, the sand, were done with kind of a raw sienna to really differentiate the bottom half from the top half of the sand. And once that was dry, there was another layer of gold that I highlighted on there because I thought I wanted it to look like the sun was kind of glinting off of the sand, and it just kind of brought the model to life a bit more for me. Now, for the highlights I did on the worm itself, that was done in several layers, and I did have to go back and forth with the washes to really distinguish the lines from the kind of humps in the worm. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I got it right eventually. And the last thing I did to really highlight was in a few layers, I kind of very, very carefully dry brushed some white onto the teeth to bring those out. As you can see, I just made them white so that they'd stand out, and that's more or less it for this model. However, I'll talk about the shorter one. That was painted the exact same way. The teeth were a bit easier to access in this one. The body was painted exactly the same. The sand was done the same because I quite like them together. Even like this, they kind of almost fit together, as if they're fighting or cuddling, or, you know, they're fantastic little worms. The last bit I'll discuss is the hump segment. I've actually got two of these. It was painted the exact same way as the worms, with the same colors, so that they all kind of go together. And the one thing I want to mention about this part, which is really cool, is it's directional. So you've got the bursting and the diving. So the bursting, you see all the bursted bits of sand flying out, and for the caving in, it's tucked in a bit because he's tunneling in this end. So I thought that was a really cool detail that the designer was able to add in, and it just kind of makes that little bit of extra uniqueness, and I don't know what to call it, really. I guess it's just the details that mean everything to me when it comes to models and miniatures. So yeah, I'm really quite happy with that. And that's the end for my sandworms. Really cool model to have. Really simple paint job, just takes a lot of time and effort, because it's not a paint job that you want to rush. So that's all. Bye.